Well, hello, everybody. This is Rabbi Dan Levin, and this is Essential Questions. In the Ten Commandments, the Holy One forbids us to make a sculptured image of any likeness of what is in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. And yet, at the same time, since the dawn of civilization, and perhaps before, humanity has been drawn to create art. From simple cave drawings that date back before history, to the massive sculptures of ancient civilizations from Egypt, Greece, Babylon, the Mayans, the Ming Dynasty, humanity's soul finds its outlet in artistic expression. When the Holy One asked the Israelites to build a tabernacle, a dwelling place for God as they traveled through the wilderness, God insisted that the tabernacle be itself a work of art. The furnishings of the tabernacle were made of gold, including the awesome keruvim, the winged structures that adorn the top of the Ark of the Covenant. The coverings were made from carefully woven fabrics of blue, purple, and crimson yarns, as were the vestments the priests would wear. Artisans, led by Bezalel and Aholiab, gathered to fashion the different pieces. But how did Bezalel know what the pieces were supposed to look like? The Midrash teaches that Moses could not understand how to fashion the menorah, the seven-branched lampstand that would illuminate the inner tabernacle. Moses repeatedly went back and forth up Mount Sinai, but could not comprehend what God was asking. So God said to Moses, "Go to Bezalel, and he will know how to do it." And indeed, Moses asked Bezalel, and he immediately was able to make it. Moses was astonished. "God showed it to me several times, and yet I couldn't understand how to make it, yet you, who never saw it, were able to make it on your own." Bezalel, you must have been standing Bezalel, in the shadow of God. And in many ways, I think the artistic process is what it means to stand in that divine shadow. Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks wrote, "Art in Judaism always has a spiritual purpose, to make us aware of the universe as a work of art and testifying to the supreme artist, God himself. And at the same time, art has greater purpose. For centuries, art has illuminated Jewish manuscripts and ketubot, Jewish marriage contracts. Jews have also fashioned extraordinary artistic elements of Judaica, such as crowns that adorn Torah scrolls, Kiddush cups, and other sacramental items. And in more modern times, great Jewish artists like Camille Pissarro and Marc Chagall have significantly elevated the practice of art. In completing the famous windows at the Hadassah Hospital, Marc Chagall said, "If all life moves inevitably toward its end, we should, during ours, paint it with our colors of love and hope. In this love lies the social logic of life and the essential part of each religion. For me, perfection in art and life stems from this biblical source." And as he dedicated the windows, he prayed that everyone, whatever their religion, would be able to come to that space and speak of a dream where there would be no more enemies, and young and not so young would build a world of love with new colors. And he asked, "Is this dream possible?" And concluded by saying, "In art, as in life, everything is possible if it is based on love." And so today we have the privilege of speaking to two extraordinary artists who will share with us their unique connections to Judaism and to Jewish art in their careers and in their passions. Bonnie Cohen is an award-winning artist whose commissions enhance public spaces and healthcare facilities, synagogues, and community centers in the United States and in Israel. Several of her installations have been included in the Mosaic Arts International exhibitions. Her work has also been recognized by the Ohio Percent for Arts program, the Spertus Museum International Judaica Exhibition, and the Eco Arts Awards. After graduating from Carnegie Mellon University, Bonnie began her career as an art director specializing in corporate branding, but then after 15 years left the corporate world to study ceramics and creating her own unique style of retelling stories in clay. She uses a combination of predominantly luminous recycled glass mosaic and richly detailed handmade tiles, metals, smalty precious stones, and 22-karat gold leaf. Her piece, Birkat HaLev, Blessing of the Heart, adorns the southern wall of Temple Bethel's Rabbi Merle E. Singer's sanctuary. Zachary Oxman is a contemporary sculptor and artist who fashions his works in brass, stainless steel, aluminum, and wood. Selected by President Clinton to create Hanukkah menorahs for the White House and commissioned by President Obama to design and fabricate gifts for the son and daughter of Prime Minister Netanyahu and a gift for Pope Francis, Oxman's monumental works additionally grace many public spaces, hospitals, corporate buildings, synagogues, and private collections throughout the United States. He also graduated from Carnegie Mellon University and has studied also at the Studio Arts Center International in Florence, Italy. His art can be found in public spaces throughout Washington, D.C. and throughout the United States, and his work, Soaring Wisdom, graces Temple Beth El and captures my love for Jewish thought and the millennia of textual tradition that has given wing to Jewish spirituality. Bonnie and Zach, thank you so much for taking your time to be with us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you for asking me.
So, Zach, tell us a little bit. When did you know you wanted to be an artist? When did you first discover your passion for making art?
So I am definitely in one of those stories where right out of the crib, basically, I always loved making art or just really play creating. And I was very blessed that my mother was a ceramic artist and my father was an architect. So by default, I grew up in a house full of art materials all the time. That was my known. My baseline was just there was just stuff around to play. And even more importantly than that, my parents not only encouraged play, they were sharing through example that play is something that one could do. It wasn't a secondary thing. I mean, of course, these aren't thoughts I'm having as a child, but really I'm flashing, forward, reflecting back on such a big influence of just being an artist is just, it was a very open home in the sense of creativity. So I don't think I intellectually said I want to be an artist, but I think what I was doing is I was living the life as an artist before I even knew it. So I really am. There's pictures of me on the floor drawing pictures, and it's funny. It's all the same except the hair.
Bonnie, when did you know you wanted to be an artist? Tell us a little bit about your journey.
Well, I think also, like Zachary said, I always knew I wanted to be an artist. And my mother was very supportive. Both my parents were very supportive. They gave me art lessons and took me to different museums. And I was always surrounded by wonderful art and encouragement. But when it came time to go to college, my father, who was a very smart CPA, said to me, "You have to be able to make a living. And I don't want you to be a starving artist on the streets of New York." I think he had this vision in his mind. And so when I applied to Carnegie Mellon, there were two avenues that you could take. One was fine art and one was design, which included graphic design and industrial design. And so I went with the graphic design and industrial design route and enjoyed it, learned a lot, and came out of that program and went right into corporate branding and corporate identity work.
So then, Bonnie, you were doing all of this corporate work, and then you decided to take a step into being a full-time artist. How did that decision happen?
Well, life imitates art and art imitates life. And at the time, every project that I've worked on, there have been moments in my life that steered me into different directions. And my youngest son was very sick at the time that I left the design firm. And I wasn't happy with the clients. I wasn't happy with my bosses. I went from being the lowest person on the totem pole to very high on the totem pole. And I just wasn't happy. And my priorities just changed. I knew that I had to give our son attention. It took about a year for him to fully recover. That's the point that I left the commercial design world, and I started painting pottery, and I had a kiln at home, and eventually realized that I needed some more training in ceramics. So I enrolled in classes at our local university for 2 years and learned the ropes, learned what I needed to know to pursue ceramics.
So, Zach, tell us a little bit about your creative process. From the time that you formulate an idea or are given a commission, how does a piece come to fruition? Tell us a little bit about that journey from idea to an installation.
Sure. I do have a unique. I don't know other people's processes, but certainly for me, it's a process that I do thoroughly enjoy. And it starts with really, I always see myself when we're talking about commission work here. There's different creative processes. There's just speculative work where it's an idea just out of my own head. But then there's also the process of sort of being a conduit for other people's ideas or messaging, much as you read Moses, like, how do I make this thing? And he comes and he said, I love that part of the story. And often, in a way more humble way, I feel like that's sometimes it. We have something we want to share and we want to say, and we want to say it through art, but we don't know how to. And they come to me, and I become sort of that conduit of an idea to a manifestation, an object. And so for me, it really starts with just listening. And it really is at a just feeling level. And I think over time, with the feedback of whether a project, is a successful project, a successful interpretation of someone's needs or goals, it reinforces the feelings I go into it with and keeps it freer. So I really just take it in and let it just come into me. It's coming in through words that I'm understanding, but I'm trying to not think too much. I'm literally trying to just feel it. I'm letting my body feel what's happening. And so that's hearing the words, it may be seeing the environment, learning a little more about the specifics of what it is, and letting that almost as unencumbered as possible come out. And it's often literally like scribble. Analogy would be like a musician just sort of feeling the notes. And it's scribbles that starts with a flow, it's a line, and then the details and the information kind of emerges from that. And then I share it. That's very much like when we started the process with your project. And I find it's an amazing feeling when I pull something out of the air and it's taking something that's sort of ineffable and giving it physical form to be shared. And that's where I go. And so that's the first part, and that's the most important part. And once that idea, there's sort of an agreement on the language I'm using, the way I'm sharing it, then I break it down and go through my knowledge of materials and processes and the parameters of how it's going to hang, install, stand, or whatever. Those are very much further down the pipeline. But the most important part is just taking in the feelings and the stories.
And what about you, Bonnie? Is that a similar process or do you do something a little different?
No, it's a very similar process. You have to trust the process and you have to have faith that at some point during your work, something will intervene, whether it's a divine spark, and you never know when it's going to happen. But in the last 10 years, I've been doing mostly public art spaces. And so, and including Temple Bethel, I have to analyze not only the client, and this is where my corporate work really helped me, I think, and gave me some insight into how to please and come up with a solution for a client. But I have to take the space into consideration, the feeling of the community that I'm working in. And a lot of times, for instance, I did a college of engineering. I'm not an engineer, so I do hours and hours and hours of research into the area that I'm working in. I did a historic Black university where I had to do a deep dive into the history of African American art. And I do a lot of reading, I do a lot of listening to podcasts before I even touch the pencil to paper to try to just completely immerse myself into the project. And then, like Zachary said, the technicalities of how you put the piece up, how you make the piece, what materials you're going to use, that comes next. But it's that spark of inspiration that's going to meet everyone's criteria and be authentic to me and be truthful and caring and loving to the client, how that all comes together. It's just a process that can't be explained, and it's different for every project.
So let me ask you, both of you have a wide range of different kinds of pieces and commissions in different settings, including Jewish settings. So what makes a piece of art Jewish? What is it that makes Jewish art different? Bonnie, why don't you start with us?
I don't really, I consider myself an artist who is Jewish. And every project that I work on, I don't think it matters to me how, if it's for a Jewish project or a non Jewish project. I use my life experience of being a Jewish artist, of being a Jewish wife, a Jewish mother, a Jewish grandmother. I use my life experience, my values, and I treat all projects the same. I don't know if that makes any sense. Whether it's inspired by words from the Torah or whether it's inspired by words from Gandhi. I use a lot of words, I use a lot of language, I use a lot of letters in my artwork, and I try to just instill my values into the design.
So you talked about how you did a project for an historic Black university, but you had also shared with me that it kind of had a interesting Jewish connection. I find it interesting that they asked this very nice Jewish woman to do a project for an historically Black university. So tell me about the Jewish connection to that project.
Well, I worked directly with the president of the university. It was the only historic Black university in Ohio. And she had seen my work in Jewish spaces, and she had seen my work that was influenced by words from Torah and chose me. And if you look at me, I am about the whitest person that you'll ever see. And somehow she felt that I would be the right person for this project. And in making my presentation to her, rather than it being a committee, it was just the president and me sitting at a table. And I told her that I really struggled with the design. I worked and worked and worked. I did maybe 50, 60 sketches. Nothing worked. And I didn't know what to do next. But my mother in law passed away during this time. And the day after her funeral, I went back to work on the project. And I told the president this as I'm telling her this story, I see a tear is running down her face. And I thought, I've never made a client cry. I didn't know what was going on, but I told her that it was close to Passover. And when I started my research again, it was the 50th anniversary of the Freedom Seder. And as I'm telling her, her assistant is bringing her Kleenex. And somehow something happened. It's that moment that Zachary talked about, that you talked about with Moses. It was this aha moment about the Passover Seder. It was a recording on NPR. It was using the exact part of the Seder that my mother in law used to read. This happened the day after her funeral. And it gives me chills even to this day to think about it. And as it happened, I took the design, I threw all the paper on the floor, and somehow the design was on the floor. I don't know how it happened. And she told me that a friend of hers, a very close friend of hers who was Jewish, who was like a grandparent to her children when she lived in LA, had just passed away. So we just had this incredible bond over not only the Jewish Black experience, but this personal connection experience through Passover. I mean, all of this feeding into a historic Black university. And when the project was done, a student came up to me and said the best compliment that I've ever gotten in a project. And it was, this artwork makes me feel like the university cares about me.
Mm, wow, that's so powerful.
It's so powerful. And how Jewish is that? I mean, that is the most Jewish thing you could ask for as a Jewish artist. And it wasn't for a Jewish project.
And I love how you're talking about how this experience of creating art sort of transcends all of those divides that often keep people apart from each other.
Mhm.
That here you are, a Jewish woman having an experience of loss that transcends the boundary between you and the university that you're trying to serve, because its president is also dealing with that universal sense of loss, that universal need to experience liberation, and that what was going on in your soul touched the soul of a student at that university. That's an amazing story. And Zachary, you were asked as a Jewish artist to fashion something for Pope Francis, who is one of the world's great transformative religious leaders. So, what was it like for you as a Jewish man to
Right.
make something for the head of the Catholic Church?
I mean, you talk about full circle. Like, the realities of that experience were so, they were filled with a lot of emotion and thought to process in a very short period of time. Everything from the obvious of the immense honor to even be chosen to create this. The materials that I was given to create with were pieces of the Statue of Liberty. So I'm collaborating with Augustus Bartoli and Gustav Eiffel with literally the iron bar that I created the sculpture with was fashioned in Gustav Eiffel's shop in France. It was crazy. And then I'm a Jew, making a sculpture for Pope. The fact that they would come to me for that, full knowing, because the relationships I had established that ultimately led them to me included creating Judaica for Shimon Peres, Benjamin Netanyahu, the menorahs for the White House. I mean, this has been a 20-year career built around the beginnings of doing the menorahs for the Clinton administration. So it was hard to have it even sink in the specifics of the profound nature of it to me. But I do think the reason they chose to use a piece of the Statue of Liberty to create a gift is, this is diplomacy. A gift needed to be presented. And presenting a gift to the least material human being in the world. So what do? So they created an object with a piece of material that represented these ideals of America, these ideals of embracing immigration, freedom from oppression. These are Jewish themes. These are symbols that are so universal. And then the running joke is, well, it's for the Pope. Jesus was a Jew himself. So, we're all somehow connected in this thing. But I just think that is one of the things when you say Jewish art to me, very similar to some of Bonnie's talks. There's this universal language that the core of Judaism is they're just fundamental beliefs that are so universal. I mean, it is really a way of living life. You can't complain about family, all these things, tikkun olam. I mean, this is what it's about. And these objects often are rooted in one of these lessons that are hard to argue with, no matter where you come from on that. So for me, there hasn't necessarily been a distinction in the messaging between being Jewish and another ideal. But where the Judaism comes in for me is because I grew up in a very culturally Jewish atmosphere. It was not my personal experience. I grew up in Reston, Virginia. There was not a lot of Jewish friends at that time. It was my Jewish experience came through my grandparents. They were observant Jews, not Orthodox by any means, but we would go for the holidays. But really the experience that was coming in, because I didn't understand Hebrew, but we'd go to synagogue on the high holy days and I'd hear this, but it was really the rituals. And those rituals for me were just family. It was really gathering. It was all joy. And even in the grieving, somehow those experiences, you'd come together and you'd share food. It was celebration. You really just celebrated life. And those were the beginning themes of my Judaica, were just these feelings I had that I then applied to all kinds of things. And one of those objects that I applied was a menorah. And when you talk about like a spark, something connected with people. I mean, like a lightning bolt. I mean, this is an early career where there was all kinds of different objects I was making. And that menorah just was grabbed people. And in a very short period of time, I mean, just a couple years, it's in the White House. And that's really what launched my career. So what was interesting, you can imagine the experiences coming out of that, having created a menorah for the White House, it's in the New York Times, is I'm starting to get requests. I mean, all kinds of different Judaic opportunities. And I was always very authentic because I never wanted to take this opportunity and pretend to be something I wasn't. Many of my contemporaries at the time that I was starting to meet in the sort of the Judaic circuit were very spiritual people, and they were actually using their Judaic art to teach. And I would often, when I would speak, I'd get up and I'd say, in a very special way to me, my Judaic art, I come to it not from a point of teaching, but I actually come to a point of learning. That I've actually had this opportunity to learn more about my Judaism by the opportunities that people are coming to me and saying, could you do this? Could you do a Havdalah set? I'd be like, what is a Havdalah set? I mean, I didn't know so I'd have to learn. And so it was actually teaching me more about it. So I think when I connect, what might elevate when I create Jewish art is, I think, beyond the universal message that I might capture in other works, there is something that does connect me to learning more about sort of that ineffable genetic sense of where we come from, when you just feel like you're home, or something just feels right. And whether it's epigenetics or whatever, it's just in our genes. I do feel that there's a bit that's very special.
I love the idea of thinking about your artistic process from the vantage point not of as a teacher, but as a learner. And I think that artists sometimes do different processes. So one of my dearest friends, Rabbi Matt Berkowitz, is an extraordinary artist. He lives in Jerusalem, and he has illuminated extraordinary works. He did an illuminated Haggadah, which has 27 individual pieces that draws out very, very rich meanings in the Passover Seder. His art, in so many ways, is an expression of his teaching. That's what he is as a rabbi. He's trying to elevate the experience and the understanding of Jewish text and tradition, and his art is a magnificent vehicle for that. And I love the idea that it doesn't always have to be about me teaching you. It could be about, hey, we're learning together. And in so many ways, that is really the Jewish process. When a great rabbi and an elementary student sit together, there isn't a sense that one's the teacher, one's the student. There's the idea that we're learning together. I've been teaching confirmation class to 10th graders for 30 years. I can tell you every single Tuesday, I'm a learner as much as they are because of what they bring to the conversation and the discussion. I'm reminded from when I was young, I was in rabbinical school. We were living in Israel. My parents came to visit, and so we rented a car and we drove all over the country. And we were in Tzfat. And Tzfat, as I think the both of you know, is this magnificent artist colony in addition to being the home of Kabbalah. And I met this amazing artist as we're literally just walking down the lane there named Yaakov Katzenbacher. So Yaakov Katzenbacher is the son of Polish parents. He was raised in Paris. He used to go to nightclubs, and then he became Bal Tshuva and moved to Israel and turned from a hippie into a chassid. And his art has all of these amazing, rich, geometric expressions. And when he got older and his hand was not quite as firm, his photography is quite amazing. And there was this very abstract print that he had in his gallery that sort of fascinated me. And I was 22 years old, and I'm looking at this print. And for me, it was really expensive. And I remember saying to my father, how do you know whether something is worth buying? And he said, I don't really know anything about art, Dan, but the way that I decide is I think art is the more you look at it, the more you want to look at it. And I never forgot that lesson. And I was thinking about that Zach, because you write on your website that your sculpture is something that you want to invite the viewer to linger. And so I wanted to ask, how do you fashion something that keeps the viewer engaged? What is it about a piece of art that sort of brings somebody to linger? And I can tell you both that your pieces at Temple Bethel make people linger. I watch it. People come, Zach, to your Soaring Wisdom piece and they stare at it for a while. Bonnie, I see people in the sanctuary getting a crink in their neck as they look to the right to look at your Birkat HaLev mosaic. So, Zach, tell us a little bit about sort of when you think about a piece that makes someone linger. What is it about a piece of art that does that?
So every artist, has a process, a mechanical process. A painter has a compositional language. They can bring someone in through a color or area and pull them through on this journey. There's an underlying mechanics to that over time they realize. It's not just happening. They use that as a tool. For me, because my art is, although it's a very personal journey when I'm creating it, it is to be heard. And so that's a communication. And I do value the things that what you just described of wanting someone to engage in it, because I think it's a metaphor of learning in itself, of wanting to explore as opposed to just consume. So I call them breadcrumbs. And breadcrumbs for me in my art, and the meaning of the breadcrumb is because I like to describe it, breadcrumb is like you don't really know where you're going, but you go enough to pick up the next one. And then you go enough, you can see the one just enough in the distance so you can go and you grab that. And what you're doing is you're leading someone on a journey, one little step at a time, but those steps have to be there. So I use steps as it can be just whether it's an iconic image, iconic shape that represents something, even if it's blurry and in the distance in its clarity, but it draws them in. There's a little bit I understand that, as opposed to someone having to understand the language to understand what I'm saying. I can lead them in one letter at a time, one word at a time into this story. To me, that's really important, because I think what happens is, and that's a little bit as you talk about the learner, the teacher in me with my art, wanting the teaching in the sense of sharing the story. And I think the difference maybe between sharing and teaching is actually how you get a person to understand it. Are you a good teacher so they understand it? It's not just the act of sharing, but it's actually helping them understand it.
So, Bonnie, you tell it when we spoke that creative artwork is for you a storytelling process also. And for you, in many ways, you said that being a Jewish artist means creating artwork that's authentic, that comes from a place in you of a good heart and good intentions and in a spirit of community, which are an extension of your Jewish values. So tell us a little bit about, for you, what makes art real art?
That's a hard question. What makes art real art? I think the creator of the art, if they think it's real art, then it's real art.
So
How?
let me say that question perhaps a little bit differently.
Okay.
So when you seek to create a piece of art, what is it that allows you, as you described, to discover a spark of the divine in your work?
Well, I think I have to just, again, I'll go back to what I said before, trust the process, that at some point in every project, I will have the divine inspiration. Sometimes it takes a lot longer. And when you were talking about a teacher versus a student and how much a teacher learns from their students, before I started doing large pieces of artwork, I taught a Judaic art class to high schoolers at the Hebrew high school in our community. And every class, I started with a prayer. There's a wonderful book by Lawrence Kushner called The Book of Letters. And he says the prayer for scribes before he writes any Jewish letters. And so I started, this whole class was based on Jewish lettering. And I started the class every time with the prayer. I made the kids sit straight. It was a class that included Jewish calligraphy, and they made these Seder plates out of clay. And the last class, I had them paint with glaze the Hebrew letters on the Seder plate. And of course, I made them say the prayer at the beginning of class, the prayer for scribes. Praise be you has taught my hand to scribe the letters. And the class was finished. And I said to the kids, they did an amazing job. The Seder plates looked wonderful. And one boy raised his hand and said, Mrs. Cohen, it was the prayer. So talk about the teacher learning from the students. It's what I wanted, of course, in the beginning when I designed this class, but to actually have a 16-year-old boy recognize that it was the prayer that helped his hand scribe these beautiful letters. It's that spark. You don't know when it's going to happen in the most unexpected times, but I just have to trust and have faith that it will happen.
So, thinking about that, Bonnie, what do you think makes a piece of art a masterpiece? What makes great art great?
I think art is really subjective. I think what one person likes, someone else may totally not like. And even in, the most famous museums in the world, I remember seeing the Mona Lisa and being disappointed. It was small, it was dark. I don't get it. I just, it's very subjective. I think it's very, very personal. I don't know the answer to that question.
What would you say, Zach?
I think there's agreement with that in the sense of a lot of times what gets deemed a masterpiece might be sort of those in charge of deeming things masterpieces or not. But I do think there can be works of art that just possess a certain resonance through their composition, through their sound, whatever it is that is so in tune with the human spirit and the human condition that it might be beyond an intellectual description as to why, but they are just so aligned that they are masterpieces. That's where I think they are. They exist outside of a human judgment and more in a natural order that the humans share with that work of art. Something like that, I would think.
I think in some ways also it has to do with the depth of spirit that is, I would say, invested in the piece by the artist, in the way that it can be accessed by those who experience it. So I do a lesson with our 10th graders every year where I show them Van Gogh's Starry Night. And I say, all right, well, let's take a look at this painting. Let's spend 90 seconds just studying the painting and just staring at the painting. For 16-year-olds to stare at anything for that long is almost soul-crushing for them. It's so hard for them to do because they're so conditioned to not pay attention to anything. But I force them to do this for a couple of times because usually the first time is an epic fail. And then I say, all right, no, really, I want you to see, don't talk, don't look at your phone, don't kibitz with anybody. Just look at this painting for 90 seconds and tell me what you saw. And then we go through it again and I say, so tell me what it made you feel. And part of that process of exploring that painting is to try to see if you can open your soul wide enough to feel what the artist was trying to say through the painting. And of course, there are amazing resonances in that particular work, and they're not even looking at the real painting. They're looking at something fundamentally different. They're looking at it on a television screen that I captured on a PowerPoint. So it's not even the real work. But it's amazing, even through that many filters, how they can connect to the piece. And in many ways, I think the Torah was created through a very similar process of deep divine inspiration, and the vehicle, the medium that the ancient ancestors of ours had was poetry or prose or narrative. And that's how they poured out their soul. And if you open your heart up wide enough to that narrative, to that poem, to that piece that comes from the Tanakh or the Torah, you can capture a glimmer of the divine experience that that artist was able to express, in the same way that I think if you open your heart up to a piece of sculpture or to a mosaic or to a painting, you can capture that sense of a person's spiritual investment. So when you look at the body of work that you've created, sometimes for corporate clients, sometimes, as you said, it just sort of bubbles up from your own soul. Do you feel a sense of your own spiritual investment in what you create? Is it there for us to find, or is it just trying to channel what the client wants to convey? How does your soul link in with sort of the pieces that you ultimately create?
I think for me, my goal is to make art that makes people feel something as much as I feel it when I'm making the art. And if I've done that, then I think it's successful. And I think it goes back to the question that you asked about what makes great art. And I said I saw the Mona Lisa and I didn't feel anything, but I saw a painting by Monet in the Musée d'Orsay that I stood in front of, and it made me cry. I mean, it made me cry. I could feel the wind. I could feel the heat of the sun. I could feel it. And if I can do even a minute part of that, if I can instill that into my artwork, then it's not great by any means, but I think I've succeeded. That would be my goal. My greatest goal is to make people feel something when they look at my art.
What would you say, Zach, in terms of your...
Absolutely. I mean, that's where the thread that's always gone through my work is starting in the very beginning days. I was just so moved when I was studying in Florence, in Italy and all over Italy, when I saw the work of the Baroque period, the movement in that sculpture. And, as Bonnie was explaining, and you were even talking about an artist pouring their soul into, I mean, I was drawn into it on so many levels, on the technical nature of it, what they were doing with these materials, the stories they were telling, and how they were telling the story. The materials were literally transcending their own form. Marble looked soft, it looked light. And I saw the emotion was coming out of it, and it was through motion. But the hierarchy was creating an emotion through my art. And I used to do that through motion. So motion, how someone feels is like a musical score, the tone of music. Motion of a piece of artwork starts instilling a feeling. Even though that's been expressed in so many different ways over the past 35 years, it really is about evoking a feeling that is really the most important part of the story. You set the tone, and then you share the story, and that helps really convey that story. So that's the thread that links all of mine together, and really is, to this day. We talked about this on your project. It was that this is a poem. I often refer to my sculptures as poems, and as you reflect to this, because a poem is something that is, it is information in an emotional form left open for those to embrace it however they come. It leaves it open for the viewer to become a part of this story. And I think that's where you really get that emotional connection with an audience and with someone outside of yourself, when they can see themselves in that story.
I will tell you, whenever I walk down the hallway of our main gallery leading to our sanctuary, and I get to walk by those soaring folios that are still hanging there very nicely that you installed, I get excited to just be in that space. And similarly, Bonnie, when we enter in the sanctuary, there is something about all of those glittering tiles on the wall that you put there that make the prayer in that space more resonant. I think that it's not even always directly engaging with the piece that adds that spiritual energy. It's the presence of the piece itself that I think oftentimes sort of contributes to what it feels like to be in that space, that the art just sort of brings a really remarkable energy that we feel. I can't thank the both of you enough for being here with us, and we're so grateful for your contributions, not only to Temple Bethel and to other truly remarkable places around our country, but thank you for making the world, both of you, a more beautiful place. The Essential Questions podcast has been made possible by the Temple Bethel Jewish Ideas Incubator, committed to creativity and innovation in modern Jewish life. Many thanks to our production team. You can find this podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, and the Podbean app, as well as on Temple Bethel's website, tbeboca.org/essential questions. Share this podcast with your friends. Rate us on Apple Podcast or Spotify to spread the word. And we want to know, what are your essential questions? Let us know by emailing us at eq@tbeboca.org. I'm Rabbi Dan Levin, and thanks for listening to the Essential Questions podcast.